please, Susanna. Position my wonderful whiteboard. By the way, I can't write legibly, so right. Can everyone sort of see everything? Sorry, I realised I put something in front. Can everyone see the screen behind still? Yep. Yeah. Cool. Okay, great. So just going to start with a story. So Graham was Graham was a South African evangelical Christian who was smuggled one night several years ago into an underground communist group full of young people who were about to go off and fight apartheid. When he arrived, the leader spoke to him. He said, "Tell us about the gospel of Jesus Christ." And this was at a real critical stage for them in their spiritual development. And they were sort of half hoping that he'd be able to provide an alternative to what was going to be a violent struggle to to sort out the tragedy that was going to happen in South Africa. Graham gave a clear and powerful presentation of the gospel. He showed how personal faith in Christ wonderfully transforms people and creates a new body of believers, where there is no Jew or Greek, male or female, rich or poor, or black or white. The group listened intently. They were amazed by what Graham had to say. It transformed their lives in some ways. And then he finished the talk. At the end of the talk, one 17-year-old boy explained to him, "That is wonderful. Show me where I can see this happening." At that point, Graham's face fell, as he sadly responded that he couldn't think of anywhere in South Africa where Christians were truly living out the gospel message. "Then the whole of this is a piece of rubbish," the young man spat out at him angrily. Within a month, that young man left the country to join the armed struggle against apartheid, and he eventually paid for that with his life. Now, that young man gave us a strong message. How can we claim our faith is alive if we fail to live it in a consistent way, in the way that Jesus has shown us how to live? And George Ballmer says something quite similar. He says, "Christianity has largely failed since the middle of the 20th century because Jesus' modern-day disciples do not act like Jesus." Now, I know that's not true for us all in everything, but it's good to be thinking about that, especially as we look at this rather more challenging topic. So could I have the next slide, please? No. Now, I've renamed it because I was trying to get my head around what it's all about. So I've called it the paradox of being a follower of Jesus. The original title was what not to do to one another. But why I felt this was quite important is that, so what's a paradox? A paradox is a statement that seems to say the opposite things and yet is still true. So the paradox here is of what Jesus did and taught for us to follow versus what we actually do in our everyday lives and how we behave as believers. That's a real struggle sometimes, isn't it? Because we have all sorts of pressures on us to do different things. So with that in mind, we'll start with a bit of a quiz. Can we have the next slide, please, Suzanne? What are the things Jesus has asked us not to do? I'm not saying we're going to get them all. Not
to judge.
Not to judge. I'm going to get my pen and paper here. That was anybody. So, not to. Yeah. First we got. Let's be hypocrites. I was going to ask the Bible verse, but I think that's a bit strong. I can't spell hypocrite. Fine, it's fine. I'm just going to put that here then, because I can't spell hypocrite. Not to judge, not to be hypocrites. Yeah, hypocrites. What else have we got?
Not to think too highly of ourselves.
Ooh.
Also not to think Also the opposite.
Or too low.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Right.
Let's bring this over here so you can hear me. That's or too high or too low of ourselves. Is there any more sort of fundamental stuff that Jesus asks us not to do? Not to lie, good call, isn't it? Yeah.
Not to worship other gods.
Yeah. Do not commit adultery. Yeah. Oops. Sorry, say again?
Not to hate.
Hate. This is brilliant, isn't it? You've read my script. Yes. There are loads. I'm just interested to think about it.
Steal.
Steal, absolutely. The line? Yeah.
Lying.
Yeah, you've got that. That's cool. Okay, else go to the place as well. That's right. Yeah.
Not to serve other gods.
Yeah, so I've got the worship on there, but other gods, yeah. I've got a list of about 42 here.
Wow.
So some of the others that's maybe come up, just that you might put the glass on again. I think we covered a little bit. Arrogance, bitterness, blasphemy, which is the worship of other gods, complaining, conceit, coveting. Well, maybe we've experienced that one time or another. Cowardice, deceit, defrauding, disobedience, divisions, divorce, drinking, drunkenness, envy, fearfulness, filthiness, foolishness, fornication, greed. I think we touched on that. There's quite a lot of stuff there. Idolatry, which we touched on. Malice, murder, which we haven't. So slander, sorcery, strife, swearing, swindling, thievery, treachery, unforgiveness, ungodliness, ungratefulness, unholiness, unrighteousness, wickedness, along with various others. So you can see it's quite an exhaustive list, but really just to illustrate there's quite a lot of stuff here. Now we're not going to, not for any moment, attempting to tackle all this stuff today, but what I really wanted to paint here a picture of this, it's an awful lot of things to think about. And I think that's sometimes really hard. And I think we have a responsibility to just consider that stuff and what that looks like on the outside as we sort of portray what it means to be some followers of Jesus. So can I have the next slide, please, Susanna? Right. Have I got my pages around the right way? Double-sided printing is always a bit tricky. So guess what this slide illustrates? Lies, well done. A Pinocchio takeoff, brilliant. So don't lie to one another. So this is from Colossians. I mean, there's quite a few verses in the Bible, but the ones I picked out is Colossians 3 verse 9 that says, "Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices." And this is also referenced in Leviticus 19 where it says, "Do not deceive one another, do not lie to one another." So lies are quite interesting, aren't they? Because there's a whole magnitude of different lies we can tell each other. We can say things like, "I'm fine," when I'm not. It's a lie. "Of course I love you." Might be a lie. "I'll call you." "No, you don't look fat in those jeans." Could potentially be a lie. Lies are morally wrong for two reasons. Firstly, lying corrupts the most important quality of being human, our ability to make free, rational choices. Each lie I tell contradicts the part of me that gives me mortal worth. Secondly, my lies can rob others of their freedom to choose rationally. So if I tell you I'm fine, you can't choose to comfort me or help me or ignore me. You just don't know. in some ways. And there's lots of other, and that by the way, those definitions were taken from the Institute of Applied Ethics. The key thing here, really, to iterate, is that I just think we need to be really careful, because actually sometimes I think we lie because we think it's the best thing in the situation. Other times we lie for other reasons. Maybe it's greed, maybe it's gain, maybe it's we just don't want to deal with the situation. And I'm not saying we need to be, because I think there's a difference between being brutally honest, you know, where we're honest to a point of hurting someone, but we can still say be truthful, but be conscious of other people's feelings, if that makes sense. Because I think there's massive implications for relationships and trust. Because anyone that's experienced being lied to or has lied themselves, because there's lots of evidence to say that we all do it from time to time. Some of us much more regularly than others, depending on what role we're in or what pressures we're under. That at some point, those lies will often be exposed. And when they are, that can be absolutely catastrophic sometimes for relationships and situations. And it's just, I think it's just something important there about thinking about, especially in that context of that first story. If we're going to really show what this gospel message looks like on earth, I think these are some of the things that we have to really hold dear. Are we truthful in our dealings with one another and everyone else that we deal with? Can we have the next slide, please, Suzanne? So this is a harder one, hate, which I know Lily mentioned. So the Bible's quite clear about not hating. It says, don't hate one another. For we ourselves were foolish, disobedient, led astray slaves to various passions and pleasures, passing our days in malice, envy, hatred by others, and hating one another. That's from Titus 3:3. Now, hate is an extremely strong word. What does it mean? Well, the definition I found, hate is to have extreme enmity towards another person or another thing. So you might be asking, well, what drives hate? So I guess many of us have experienced that at some time in our life, where we've been pushed to extremely dislike something or possibly hate something or someone because of something that's gone on. And I was quite interested when you start to look at this, that what are the drivers that make us feel like that? So here are some that came out. The fear of other. We hate because we fear things that are different to us sometimes. And that could be true for lots of things. And some good examples are particularly around race, quite often, or gender. Sometimes we hate people because they are different to us and we fundamentally can't bridge that gap. That's why there are some people are at. There's fear of ourselves as well. And this is something that Freud talked about, and it's called projection, where we hate because actually what we want to do is we see something in ourselves that we want to repress. And when we see it in someone else, we hate it in them, if that makes sense. So we might have a particular feeling about something and it's quite uncomfortable, this, I know. But this is really part of human behaviour sometimes. We see something else that we don't like, so we repress it ourselves, but then when we see it in someone else, we hate it, and then we hate that person because of it. And that's really hard, but I think sometimes we have to call it. There's also sometimes a lack of self-compassion, because the antidote for hate is compassion. But if we have no compassion for ourselves, it's quite hard to have compassion for other people. So we need to be aware of that stuff. So if we find part of ourselves unacceptable, we tend to attack others in order to defend against that threat. Sometimes people hate to fill the void. And what I mean by that is acts of hate are attempts to sometimes distract oneself from feelings such as helplessness, powerlessness, injustice, inadequacy, and even shame. For some individuals, hate is grounded in some sense of perceived threat to them or their way of being or who they are. And that's a real thing. Like much of anger, it is a reaction and a distraction from some of their inner pain. The individual consumed by hate may believe that the only way to regain some sense of power over their pain is to sort of preemptively strike against others. In this context, each moment of hate is a temporary relief in the inner self. It's almost like taking one of those sorts of like hits of something to draw you away. And of course, there's also social and cultural factors that can really engender hatredness, maybe based on our heritage or who we are or what we've experienced during our life that means that we hate other groups. So I think it's just really important to be aware. I just want to, and that, as I talk about that, it really kind of, I just think it's really heavy, doesn't it? That we live in a world where people are like that, and sometimes we can be like that because of various things that happened in our lives. And I just want to encourage you, if you want, I know Christ can sort this out. I know he can. I know it's not always easy. I know it's sometimes a really long process, but if that is something that is screaming at you at the moment, I'd love to pray for you. There's other people that love to pray with you. You don't have to tell them what it is, because Jesus can sort this stuff out. But it's so important that we call it, because I think Christ wants us to actually acknowledge stuff so we can move forwards with it. Can we have the next slide, please, sir? And we've got the monkey of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. This is the speak no evil one, by the way, just in case you're wondering. So, speak no evil or grumble against one another. James 4:11 says, do not speak evil against one another, brothers. And James 5:9 says, do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. I don't know about you, but I find in the culture we live in, grumbling and gossiping is the easiest thing to fall into if you're not careful. It's very straightforward. And it's always about talking, generally it's about grumbling or gossiping about someone who's not there, which is, is a pretty hard thing. But I think there's a fundamental issue here as Christians if we do that, because we are one body of Christ when we grumble and gossip about each other particularly. Then it's kind of like the eye having a go at the foot, or the ear having a go at the nostril, or pick any kind of combination of two that you like. How can we be one body if we've got that kind of sense of disunity in terms of what we're doing? If we've got a problem with one another, we need to talk about it with one another in a constructive way, or we need to be honest about it, not grumble about it. I always find it amusing not amusing, but I find it particularly challenging, when you've done something wrong and someone's seen that and they tell someone else about it, and it's like, I can't change that if I don't know, and the fact I've got it secondhand. And I'm not talking about anything, I'm just talking about an example of something. There's nothing I can do to change it. But by the same token, if someone's done something to upset me and I tell my friend about it, they're not going to be able to change anything about it. The only thing that can ever change it is to have that conversation. So just encourage you to think about that when we have quarrels or things that kind of don't sit right with us. The other thing I've noticed about this is, I know we're only talking about 3 different ones of that huge list we started to create here, but actually, have you noticed how they're interlinked? And what I mean by that is, lying can drive hate. Hate can drive us to speak ill of one another. Speaking ill of one another can drive us to lie about what we've said. Isn't it interesting, isn't it? What a fantastic toolkit someone's designed there to really kind of manipulate and kind of get the church going the wrong way. I just really want to call it to say, actually, it's so important that we notice this stuff, because God's bigger than all this, yeah? All this stuff is sought outable, but we need to come to him with it, is what I'd say. I've just got a bit conscious of time, so if we just go to the next slide, please, Susanna. I just want to just to take a moment there just to think about what's happened here, we talked about. And I just think on our tables, it would be good, you might want to just group together a bit more, and just take a moment just to think about, what's the thing that we talked about this morning that's hit you most? What struck you most is the first question. And the second question is, what would you like to do differently tomorrow? You don't have to answer those within the group if you just want to kind of think about in your head, but if you'd like to kind of get into it, because I know, do you guys want to get together? Just thinking, or do you want to stay? Just thinking, do you want to join Sandra and fun there? Good to have probably 3 to 4s here, just so we've got some groups. Everyone happy with that? So what struck you most? What struck you most? And what one thing would you like to do differently tomorrow based on what you've heard about this stuff? Yeah, just take a couple of minutes. on your conversations, but do take away the thing you'd like to change tomorrow. Take it with you, write it down, do what you need to do with it. And if you feel brave enough, make yourself accountable to someone about it. Can be helpful. And it'd be great to hear the testimonies of what's happening next week, yeah? That'd be awesome. Just as we finally finish, as I said at the beginning, when we prayed this morning, we really felt it would be great to offer healing. If someone wants to be prayed for to be healed today, we would love to do that. If you're on Zoom, we'd love to do that as well. We might need to arrange that separately, but we'll definitely have to do that. But we're going to be doing it over there, myself and Daniel, but also if anyone's like to join us. If you want to be prayed for, you can be prayed for good things and anything. It's important we pray for people, and it's important as a church that we really practice what we preach here. So God bless you. I'll send you out in peace and pray your blessings, and that your conversation will continue to be blessed. It's been wonderful hanging out with you today. God bless.